The For the Region podcast is a way to stay connected with the huge range of different conversations and events that we host across South West Wales. Hello and welcome to this discussion hosted by me, Dawn Lyle at For the Region. We're delighted to bring together a group of sustainability experts and consultants from here in South West Wales for a general discussion about how we can work together to help businesses across South West Wales to decarbonise their activities and operations. What does that mean? What does that look like? We're hoping that today's conversation will demystify for businesses the kinds of things that they could or should be doing to help strengthen our green economy and create sustainable businesses and supply chains here in South West Wales. And also to understand the career journey that colleagues in the room have been on, and hopefully offer some insight to anyone thinking about whether a career in environmental sustainability and consultancy might be for them. So really excited to get into the conversation today. For the Region works on lots of different projects, and one of the things that we're doing behind the scenes at the moment is working with anchor organisations, particularly in Pembrokeshire, who are really focused on what they need to be doing to decarbonise their own operations and business activities. And for those large anchor organisations like, for example, Bluestone Holiday Resort or the Port of Milford Haven, and organisations like Pembrokeshire College, they're subject to targets and standards, not least the net zero 2035 or net zero 2040 ambitions, and have taken great strides within their own large kind of anchor organisations to decarbonise their scope 1 and potentially scope 2 emissions. And when it starts to become about scope 3 emissions, and again, I'm hoping that we can sort of demystify some of the jargon here today for those that aren't following the different scopes. But my understanding is that scope 3 emissions relates to the emissions in your wider supply chain. And the work that we're undertaking together with those organisations is to think about what that opportunity means for SMEs and smaller businesses in the regional supply chain, because those anchor organisations clearly have a big role to play in buying local and spending as much of their money with local businesses as possible, and they really want to do that. But at the same time, they're going to need increasing amounts of data and transparency regarding carbon emissions and carbon reporting. And so that means that if we are to keep supporting smaller businesses in our regional supply chains, those small SMEs need to get up to speed with what they need to be doing to measure and monitor and reduce and report on their carbon emissions. And so in the course of these discussions that we're having, it seems to Zoe and myself For the Region that there is an opportunity here to make sure that we are connecting up our local businesses with the experts and advisors that can support them in their decarbonisation journey. We want to make sure that there is that network of skills and support available from within our region, because anecdotally, some organisations feel like perhaps they have to look further afield into England to find the expertise at the level that they need it. So is that true? Or have we got that sort of skill and experience here on our doorstep in South West Wales? And how can we bring all that together to make sure that we have the ecosystem to support the decarbonisation of our wider business sector? So that's what's led to today's conversation, which is part of a series of roundtable discussions on different topics in the run-up to the Green Economy Conference and exhibition that's happening in Swansea Arena on Tuesday, the 19th of November. So I hope all of you and everybody listening has already booked your free ticket to attend that event, which is going to be a fantastic day, bringing together all sorts of businesses and organisations from across South West Wales's green economy. But for today's discussion, I'm hopeful that colleagues in the room will be able to share a bit about their work as environmental consultants or associated experts, and share what they're up to, and then we can get into some discussion about what businesses need to be thinking about and how businesses can access the sort of support and advice and knowledge that they need. So I'm going to invite our panellists one at a time to introduce yourselves for a minute or two, and I'll call on you in a random order if that's all right with you. But first of all, I'll come to Max Green from ARCS. Max, please introduce yourself and tell us about your organisation.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Dawn. So my name's Max Green, and I'm from an organisation, from Swansea University, but working on a project called Applied Research for Circular Solutions. So what that means is we are a applied research team that works exclusively with businesses, providing bespoke support to help them identify and then implement circular economy opportunities. That can take quite a broad sort of nature in terms of the support that we do. So that could be anything from early stage sort of business modeling things to see sort of where you are and where you could go, technical design, feasibility studies or circular design assessments, business models for the scaling around sort of IP licensing, open innovation strategies, procurement frameworks, through to environmental assessment, so material flow analysis, life cycle analysis, and really trying to connect that whole circle so that when people are designing circular solutions, they're taking in the full life cycle. So that's sort of one side of it. In terms of what we do, we've worked over the last 3 or 4 years. We've provided sort of in-depth support to around 40 businesses across Wales. The latest project, ARCS, is primarily focused just on South West Wales, so Swansea, Carmarthen, Newport Talbot and Pembrokeshire. And then on with some other hats on, I manage the Circular Economy Research and Innovation Group for Wales, which is a pan-Welsh academic and governmental group that aims to increase collaboration across circular economy expertise, and then also teach sustainability and life cycle assessment at master's level across all engineering programmes at Swansea University.
Great, thank you, Max. Great to have you on the call, and particularly that link you've made there at the end to the skills that are coming through from students coming out of Swansea University. So look forward to discussing that a bit further later on. Thanks very much for being here. Enock, I'd love to come to you. Enock from Ebbah Sustainability. You're welcome to unmute and introduce yourself. Great to have you on the call with us.
To the unmute. Yeah. Hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Enock. So I've been doing sustainability consulting in the last year, primarily through an organization called Astutes in Cardiff, where is helping companies on establishing a sustainability framework. So whether it's the integration of what they need, or some will call the planning phase, and then the execution phase, and then the different types of tools which may be available, whether it's reporting tools or whether it's recording the carbon footprint. So it's more focusing on the sustainability framework. So it might be just focusing on circular economy, like as Max described, which could be, let's say, a manufacturing company. They're looking at sustainability purely from a circular economy, whether it's their materials, minimizing waste, zero waste, minimizing cost to landfill. So that's the ballpark. And then I also do sustainability training. So the organization called IEMA, the Institute of Environment and Management Assessment, they provide certificate in environmental management, and the foundation, which I also deliver those, which I've been doing for about 12 months now. So that's an overview of sustainability framework and sustainability training with the IEMA organization.
Thank you. Yeah, really helpful to understand then, you know, straight away there are those 2 ways in which businesses can engage in all of this. Firstly is to undertake the kinds of training that is available that you've described, and then secondly, taking those steps to establish their sustainability framework and how they're going to execute against that. Thank you. Great to have you on the call, Enock. Can I come to you next, Alex from CRS, Alex Ross?
I'm Alex Ross from Circular Resource Specialists. We are an environmental consultancy We formed about 2 years ago, and there's 3 of us in the team. We sort of offer a range of services around environmental consultancy services with a real focus on sort of waste and resource management. The team itself, we've got a real long background in the industry and the sector. We've worked for organisations like Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales, WRAP, also waste collection companies and local authority environmental departments. So we've got kind of a range of background there. Initially, we sort of started working with local authorities and national government, but has moved on to we working quite a lot with businesses. Our help is really around sort of developing environmental policies, undertaking carbon assessments, life cycle assessments, circular economy assessments. We've got quite a deep background with sort of utilising data and data modelling, so we're real focus on using that as an evidence base. We've also helped quite a few businesses prepare for the new workplace regulations in Wales. And we've found as we work with businesses that the kind of work develops quite a lot from a single kind of requirement, and as you explore those things, they kind of develop a bit more widely. And yeah, we've provided quite a lot of support around that. And more recently, we've sort of secured a bit of funding to help businesses undertake waste audits in South West Wales. So we're starting that project off now, but helping businesses to look at the waste they produce, identify opportunities to reduce that or divert it into sort of more environmentally friendly sort of outputs, and also to sort of look at their procurement processes and see if there's a potential to procure better waste collection services.
Really interesting. Thank you, Alex. And as you've referred to there's changing times here in Wales at the moment with new regulations about how businesses are to dispose of and recycle their waste, bringing what businesses have to do more in line with, I think, what we have to do as households in terms of sorting our own waste and arranging for different collections. So yeah, lots of interest in that sort of more circular approach to how we're using and managing materials, and great to hear that there is some support out there for businesses to undertake those waste audits. And look forward to speaking a bit more about what you mentioned there in terms of those carbon life cycle assessments as we get on with the call. Thanks for being here, Alex. Leon, I expect your work is overlapping with some of what we've heard already today, but delighted to have you on the call. Leon from Auditel.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Leon, I'm Sustainability Consultant at Auditel UK. So what I do in my role is we work with a number of businesses, whether it's small, medium or large. We're working with about 6,000 currently, creating carbon footprints and then carbon reduction plans alongside that, just really to make them more sustainable. So we understand that a lot of businesses know nothing at all about carbon, and they see the word carbon footprint when they come to do tenders or as part of government assessments, and people panic. So we try and make it as easy as possible. We come in, try and do a lot of it for them, but also grade the data, because we've seen that people are using carbon calculators and they're not the best, to be honest, because the data is only as good as what people are putting into it. So for example, if you've got an electric bill 1 year at 10,000 and then next year it's dropped down to 5,000, it doesn't automatically mean that your carbon footprint is low, and it just means that your bill has changed. So using carbon calculators can be a headache. So we work across all scopes 1, 2 and 3. Scope 3 being the most challenging, because that includes things like employee home working, franchises, investments. There's a lot to take into account into it that people don't realise. So we've got 140 in the team, and people tend to specialise in different areas. So we've got a section that deals with things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism that's just come out now. If you're exporting into Europe, we do ESOS, ESG reporting, but we can also take people's carbon footprints through an ISO. So the newest ISO out at the moment is 14068-1, which is a full international standard, which is hit past 2060 wasn't. So a lot of companies want to be seen to be doing something good for the environment, and they want to be able to promote it. So if you've got the standard, then you've got the evidence to back it up. But yeah, that's pretty much what we do. We do procurement as well alongside that, where we look for cost savings in 100 different cost areas to try and pay for the carbon reduction plans or things like solar. So yeah, it's a pretty broad network.
Yeah, sounds like a huge amount of expertise within the organisation there, Leon. And thanks for mentioning a few things there. International standards, really key to talk about how those sort of consistent international standards can help businesses to have real sort of credible story about what they're doing. And you mentioned there that businesses increasingly want to be able to promote the fact that they're trying to do the right thing. But also a key point is that it's being increasingly required and demanded of businesses through tendering processes, particularly if you're working with the public sector. There's an increasing requirement for carbon reduction plans and to have real data around that.
Big thing is greenwashing as well. Companies are scared to make claims if they can be accused of greenwashing. So we make sure that any claims that they do make are credible prior to putting that out.
Yeah, great. Thanks for being here on the call, and we'll pick up quite a few of those threads as we go on. Thanks, Leon. Mark Grant is joining us from the Welsh Government Food and Drink Sustainability Cluster, so specifically working with that sector. Mark, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks very much for the invite today, Don. So, yeah, in simple terms, I lead the Welsh Government Food and Drink Sustainability Cluster here in Wales. The cluster is one of 9 food and drink clusters that the Welsh Government have in place, and it launched in 2020, ironically just ahead of COVID. So I think all of our meetings have been kind of on Zoom and on Teams in this kind of way, which probably makes it probably the most sustainable cluster that we've had, with nobody travelling to meetings and different bits. As part of the work we do with the cluster, we've now got 120 food and drink producers in Wales working with us. Many of those are across Southwest Wales as well. We also have a number of support organisations that support the work that we do across the cluster. So I suppose a little bit different to some of the other guys who would be sustainability experts in their own rights. For us, it's about connecting the right people with the right networks. So we do a tremendous amount of work with the food innovation centres in Wales. We are linked in with AMRC Cymru up in North Wales. Again, they do a massive amount of work around waste, carbon reduction, automation and areas like that. And also linked in with RAP Cymru, RAP nationally, and people like Fair Share Cymru, etc., around repurposing food waste. So I think the key for us and the challenge for us is making sure that when producers have challenges and when they need the support, we signpost them and we get them to the right people to do it. Now, as part of the work we've done this year, we've kicked off a carbon reduction pilot plan, and we've got 80 Welsh food and drink producers signed up to that currently, and we're kind of halfway through this year now, beginning to map scope 1, scope 2, and a limited number of scope 3 emission data from the producers to form carbon reduction plans, and then we're mapping those then against the Climate Change Committee targets, so that by 2050 we can bring the producers to net zero, which is what we're doing now. I think, as the other guys have alluded to, scope 1, scope 2, obviously something that is within the producer's remit and have a fair amount of control over. On scope 3, we're really looking at only 5 areas of scope 3 currently, and that's mainly around product sourcing and ingredients, which is the biggest part of the carbon footprint for food and drink suppliers in terms of where they're getting their products from. The cluster is fully funded by Welsh Government, so we can offer support to food and drink companies free of charge, which is great news. And we do loads of work across different areas, and even outside of carbon, such as B Corp and other areas like that. So for me, as well as having a strong carbon story to tell, it's also important that we're doing the right things from a customer perspective within communities in terms of how we treat our workers as well. And just making sure the governance of our businesses are exactly where we need them to be.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you, Mark, for raising that. You know, personally, I really would love to see that this whole drive towards decarbonisation of our businesses and supply chains actually also drives all the good stuff that we want to see. Specifically for us, that's around relocalizing supply chains and making sure we are keeping spending in the local economy. But as you also referenced there are lots of other wellbeing economy metrics around fair work and decent pay and social value and giving back positive benefits into the wider community and economy, all of which I think can be empowered by this drive to net zero, and it's great to see that sort of holistic approach. But Mark, sticking with you then for a minute and thinking specifically about businesses in that sort of food and drink sector, I'm assuming that's everything from primary producers to cafes and restaurants. What are the kinds of examples of when you've been brought into a business perhaps and specifically been able to help them? What sort of challenges have you been able to address? How can businesses work with you?
I think the great thing about the cluster network is that it encourages businesses to work together to try and tackle some of the problems that they're having. So the cluster network, the whole ethos behind it is about bringing like-minded people together to try and tackle some of the bigger issues that we have. And we found that by getting people into working groups and by getting people together, we can actually accelerate some of the work we're doing. So one of the key areas, I know we've touched on B Corp briefly already, that was a key area. Highlighted by producers for us. So when we kicked the cluster off, we had one food and drink B Corp supplier in Wales. In the last 3 years, we're now up to 10. Because we can use the knowledge and we can use sharing examples of what people are doing within their businesses to tackle it, to accelerate the rate of improvement and the rate of accreditation to those businesses. I think the other things we're doing as well is, we're working with suppliers. I think the key thing we need to do is highlight the success stories. So again, there's budget within the cluster to do case studies, to do press releases. And I think, there's an awful lot of good work that goes on in Wales, and the other guys on the call will have a number of success stories with producers. I think what we need to be doing is highlighting those successes as well to make sure that we're motivating other suppliers to accelerate the journeys. So, whilst 120 food and drink suppliers sounds great, there's over 800 suppliers within the cluster. So we're only tackling a very small proportion of that. But if we can get great results with small numbers, then hopefully we'll encourage more people to come on board and start that journey.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about those sorts of peer support networks and understanding what others in similar businesses are doing and how that can really speed up process. And what a great stat, the growth of B Corps. And of course I'm aware that B Corp themselves are really looking closely at their own standard to make sure that it stays on the right side of what was already mentioned, that sort of greenwashing. I think there's new European legislation around greenwashing, and companies need to be really careful of any claims they make. And I know that B Corp, as well as others, are looking really closely to make sure that when you have an accreditation like that, you can really stand behind it.
It's interesting. I think as a cluster, we can almost be the gatekeepers with the producers that we're working with ahead of them going out and publicising themselves, because as everybody will know, it takes years and years and years to build a brand and build confidence, and you can quite easily destroy that brand within seconds if you make false accusations. And I think B Corp, when it was originally launched, and I know it came across from America across the channel a couple of years ago, it wasn't probably as balanced as I think B Corp would have liked it to have been. You could overperform in some sectors to get your point scores and not necessarily have a balanced business approach. We certainly saw some businesses that were strong in environmental areas, yet still had poor practices on the workers' front. And I think we're encouraging Welsh producers to have a balanced approach to all areas of that accreditation, so that actually they just become better, more efficient, nicer businesses to work with. And again, we know from recruitment and we know from feedback from people joining businesses, more and more young people now who are going into businesses are looking at businesses' sustainable ethos and how they operate before choosing where they want to work.
Absolutely, really increasingly important for all of us. And speaking to Martin Lewis at Bluestone Resort, he makes a really important point about sustainability credentials as a key competitive advantage and a key sort of marketing driver for businesses at the moment. And he's particularly thinking from a kind of hospitality and tourism sector. Of course, its sustainability credentials are what makes Bluestone such an exemplar. And he really recognises that right at the moment and for the next few years, that may be a real selling point for a business to have those sustainability credentials, but actually within 10 years, hopefully all businesses will be doing it, and the kind of competitive advantage will go and it will become business as usual. So he is really urging all businesses across Wales to grasp the nettle now and to really lead the way in decarbonising, and as colleagues have been talking about, their circular economy principles, whilst it is still a competitive advantage. So all sorts of great reasons why businesses should be taking these steps, as you've mentioned there. Food and drink, carbon life cycle analysis is an interesting one. Does that extend to, farmers producing milk having to really think about everything to do with how their cows are looked after and what their cows have been fed? And I mean, how far down the line does it go? Have you got examples of working with those kinds of primary producers, Mark?
Yeah, we've linked in. We've got a number of farming groups who operate with us as part of the cluster. So South Carnarvon Creameries is the biggest farming cooperative in Wales with us. We work closely with Puffin Produce in Pembrokeshire. So there's a number of key groups we've got. We've also been sat on the steering group around the Sustainable Farming Scheme in terms of the work that's been going on with that. And we've also got the likes of HB Cymru, NFU and Farmers Union of Wales sat on the cluster advising us as well on areas we should be looking at. And I think, from a sustainability perspective, it's everything from managing your cattle in terms of methane emissions and everything else that we need to tackle. I think, like anything, we have to strike a balance, because I think, certainly when you look at red meat, we should be talking about what we do as a nation on red meat versus other nations from our sustainability, and not necessarily be comparing it to plant-based foods and other sectors. Because I think, you look at the dairy and the red meat sector in Wales is probably the two bigger sectors in terms of turnover and volume and jobs and everything else it creates. And actually, we do it better than some other nations. So we've got some good stories to tell within that. So for me, it's about balance. It is about working to try and improve those areas. There's slurry trials and all sorts of things going on with some of the universities and some of the partners that we're working with to help kind of pull that methane down and reutilize some of those areas as well. And we've just got to continue to work harder to try and improve all measures in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. I'll open out to Alex or Leon if you'd like to come in on this, thinking about how businesses can work with you. What sort of services do you provide? And can you give a real life example of working with an SME to look at specifically, I suppose, around the carbon reporting and decarbonisation plans? I'd love some real life examples of businesses that have kind of grasped the nettle around their own decarbonisation journeys.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, in terms of examples of businesses we work with, like I said earlier, we found that our work kind of develops as we work with businesses, and we're sort of brought in with a UPVC windows manufacturer to help them with a pollution control matter. But as we work through it with them and looking at waste management practices and sort of overall practices of the business, you start to identify other elements of the business that potentially they can use to reduce their carbon emissions and become sort of a bit more sustainable. And I think quite often within business, it's that lack of skills and the time to do these sort of things that, they're kind of struggling to meet business as usual, and then they've got these other things to consider. But and I think what we try to offer then is that not just giving them kind of like a number, but allowing them to develop and take that off. So we sort of help them initially, and then our help diminishes over time as they become a bit more capable of doing that themselves. But that opportunity to look at their waste was then an opportunity to look at what their procurement was like, the emissions associated with that. But then also look back up the pipe then and say, well, why are we producing so much waste? What practices are happening within the business that are producing these wastes? And there are opportunities to improve those, so we're not actually producing it in the first place, or can we move waste up the hierarchy? And then working with them to sort of assign emission factors to those and model their overall kind of carbon emissions of those waste streams. and then identify what the savings are, and that gives then a bit of a kind of business case then to take forward with senior management, or to sort of look at invest to save, or what the returns on investment are of doing that, and if there are potential financial implications of reducing their overall carbon footprint. So that the kind of things we work with, and providing sort of clear evidence bases then around why it's worthwhile. It might be a kind of longer term strategy, not necessarily immediate saving, but the kind of two things are linked then, and it gives a better business case really internally.
Yeah, I think it's obviously really a lot to ask of a small business that hasn't got huge profits and is struggling to get by as it is, to add another layer of complexity and I guess decisions around what to invest in, and those kind of really thinking long term about their decarbonisation and sustainability agenda. But it's also something that bigger businesses could be investing in now. And I suppose it's creating those frameworks, as has been mentioned, to really consider the different options of where you should be spending your money for the greatest impact on your emissions and other metrics as well. Enock, you mentioned about those sort of steps to establish a framework with businesses, and then you also talked about advising them on different tools and reporting mechanisms. Do you want to say a bit more about how you can work with a business and what that sort of framework might look like in a typical case study?
Yeah, so in a typical case study for a small business, based on the challenges which has already been mentioned about budgets, there are opportunities to work with large businesses, where there are a number of large businesses who have two main strategies. One may be training, funding the supply chain in order to be able to meet the large business requirements. So what small businesses can do is work with, let's say, a large supplier, let's say M&S or other large companies, where the large companies may already have other suppliers who are already on the journey. So touching back to what Mark mentioned, so this is peer-to-peer learning, but learning from other businesses around the world or other parts of the UK who are on the journey, and learn the best bits in terms of how to improve. A number of large businesses, they grade their suppliers, so you can see which of the suppliers are, let's say, gold or platinum, and then see what are the key requirements, so you can see how you can learn. So yeah, the key message is around learning from other suppliers, also benchmarking. So if you know the key performance indicators, and that's what this framework comes in to understand the key aspects. And then so apart from the benchmarking, you also have the funding as well. As I mentioned, there's a number of organizations out there who have seen, or big companies who have realized that perhaps it may be difficult to ask suppliers outside UK to meet their requirements. So perhaps it's cheaper or economical to use local suppliers and so on. And if you look at the carbon accounting, using a local supplier, you are avoiding the shipment, the greenhouse gas emissions associated with shipping, for example. And you have some specific sectors. The UK government is coming in with the carbon pricing for specific, I know it's only specific, like the steel industry, the cement industry, or carbon intensive products, which there's going to be extra tax. So that helps to improve the economics of the large businesses if they know that they will pay, let's say, 20% more on tax when the new law comes into force. That 20%, could they invest that 8% in a local business? So those are the initiatives which I, perhaps to round it off, be prepared as you are looking at how the big businesses are solving these problems, and you could be so ready as they say, timing is everything. You know, you may have aligned yourself so perfectly that it makes business sense for a larger business to maybe invest or train or support.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point, and it was really that point that led us to want to explore this conversation, was those large organizations, large businesses, which are subject to more stringent requirements and are, you know, further along on the journey. How can those large organizations support smaller companies to take these steps? But that key point you've made there about being ready and being already aligned with what the larger businesses are asking for, so that you're really best placed as a small business here in South West Wales to take advantage of those opportunities to supply into larger businesses. And if you're on top of your carbon measurement and reporting, then you're already ahead of the game, because most small businesses are not. So yeah, really identifying what you can do. And it sounds like working with a consultant like Enock or any of the people on the call today also connects you up with those potential funding opportunities and what support and advice may be freely available here in Wales for businesses to take advantage of. Leon, you talked specifically about the problem with carbon calculators, and that there are all these other better ways, perhaps more robust ways of accounting for carbon. Can I ask you to say a little bit more and get us into the weeds a little bit more about what it actually means to measure, monitor and track your carbon, and how, what do you do in order to calculate a business's carbon footprint?
Yeah, so we start with a business discovery day where we try and get as many people as possible in the business in the same room, where we tell them why we're doing what we're doing and what we're looking to measure. Because if you haven't got everyone on board, then you're really fighting a losing battle trying to get data out of somebody in accounts and somebody that would deals with something else. Otherwise, when you're sending surveys out for how people get back and forth to work, what they drive, what engine car they've got, if it's petrol, diesel, people won't understand why you're asking for the data. So we start with the basics, but scopes 1 and 2, generally businesses sometimes manage to do themselves, but scope 3 is where they struggle. And when you've got, example, maybe a large cash and carry, for example, that carry 14,000 lines, they're thinking they have to account for every single product carbon data, whereas that's not necessarily the case. What they need to account for is the actual distribution that comes in and out of where they're selling the item from. So it's education. But going back to carbon calculators, there's hundreds of them out at the moment, and all you do is you put in the spend analysis data that goes into it, which it's a starting point, but it's going to vary so much from year to year, especially with the prices of gas and electric going up and down, that you're never going to get a credible carbon data from it. It's never going to pass any of the ISOs, or it's never going to become verified. So we won't verify a carbon footprint if we can't 100% verify the data. So if we were only given spelled analysis as part of that data, we'll say, no, we need to go back, find every single individual bill and be able to evidence that, because otherwise you could be making claims saying that you're carbon neutral based on carbon calculator or spend analysis, whereas you're not. You can be challenged then, and that's where the problems come, where people start to challenge you on what you provided. One of my colleagues is doing some work with Bangor University at the moment, where they've created a cattle feed, I believe it is, and they think that the feed could, in effect, stop the animal producing a lot less methane. But he's actually doing the calculations then to evidence that. So that's, we do a broad spectrum of things, but things like that I think is where we need to go. Is we're never going to get to net zero without bringing in things like that, or with carbon removal technology, which will come. But at the moment, we're just doing what we can to make it as low as possible.
Yeah, interesting point there about, you know, developing whole new products and services, and yeah, particularly those product innovations that can really support businesses in key ways. And it would be great to see those kinds of innovations really well supported and taking root here in Wales, which are potentially then exportable all over the world if we can come up with those kinds of innovations. I mean, that links specifically, Max, to what you're doing at Swansea University and colleagues of yours, trying to harness the kind of research and innovation that goes on within the university into new circular and low carbon products. Do you want to say a bit more about the importance of all of that?
Yeah, I think just before that, I mean, an interesting one. I think I agree with what everyone else is saying, but sort of taking a step back and really thinking, what is it that we're trying to do with carbon assessments? Or, I mean, really, we should be pushing past just the carbon assessments to be looking at the environmental assessments. You know, so for me, in the way that we often teach this is that, you know, say a life cycle assessment would be different to footprinting for a company. But it is all about data quality. And within data quality, you have to take a lot of assumptions, especially as you start to broaden out the scope of that LCA. And that's where it gets really difficult. And really, that's why larger companies want smaller companies to do the LCAs and the footprinting, because in aggregate, it makes their scope 3 reporting much easier. So you do have one side of getting your emissions so that you can sell into those bigger supply chains, you know, the bigger companies, which may be where you want to be, and that's fine. But the other side of it is if you were to do a product lifecycle assessment, where you'd have, you know, multiple categories where you may be saving on carbon, but you may massively increase the amount of water content that you're using, or, you know, I mean, there's multiple different categories you could be looking at here. So not getting blinkered just into the sort of carbon emission side of it, but thinking how can you improve the environmental performance across all categories is really important, but also not just using the number. So, okay, the number is very important if you want to sell into these big industries, especially in, say, the built environment, where you might be looking to get an environmental product declaration. Again, so the larger companies can calculate their emissions profile much easier. But really, for me, the benefit of a life cycle assessment is much more on using it as a sort of hotspotting tool. So looking across the life cycle of your product to see where those environmental hotspots are, so that you can tackle them through material substitutions, through design changes, through different business models of how you may be able to sell it, transportation models, and then being able to model that in a scenario modeling instance, so that you can start to look at what the impact would be of different solutions you could put in place before having to actually, you know, spend the money to do the prototypes. And I think that's the real, for me, that's the real power of an LCA. And it has to be used in conjunction with all of those other bits. You can't just rely on this one figure, because like Leon rightly pointed out, those figures are going to change over time. You know, you're going to have different production. You may be procuring from a different place. You may be having a different energy source, different transportation source, you know, so that figure doesn't necessarily stay for a long time. And that's sort of what we try to do within the ARCS program. So we have the software and the databases for life cycle assessment, so SimmerPro and EcoInvent. But we also then try to link that into not only where the hotspots are, but then how you can try to change it. So, for instance, we're working with a vertical farming business in Pembrokeshire that has moved from a single-use packaging for their product to a higher gauge, thicker material product that can be reused. Now, at the moment, they operate a fully closed loop system because they're just in Pembrokeshire, but we're working with them on transportation-related emissions to see over what sort of distance does that return loop not become environmentally beneficial? And in that case, what are the cycling pathways that they can put in place? Or, you know, similarly, we've worked with a business that it has a sort of novel bacterial, it's going around the NDA here, in terms of the novel bacterial encapsulation method, which then they use to treat nitrous oxide in wastewater. But in order to reduce the emissions for the production of that product, they were looking to find a growth medium which they would be able to grow all their bacteria on without having to buy that in. So we took the characterization of what they needed, found a company which was Le Creme, a big patisserie maker in Newport Talbot. And the company now takes their wastewater, which would have had to been treated at the cost of the company and the environmental impact. They take that, repurpose it, grow their bacteria on it, then encapsulate the bacteria and put that into large wastewater treatment. So, you know, really nice examples of how you can look for different ways to reduce your emissions, but through that sort of collaboration and industrial symbiosis way, you know, multiple businesses can benefit. So yeah, quite a long answer, but I think, you know, that idea of not to get blinkered onto just the carbon side of it, but to really use it as one of a suite of tools to help you, you know, build competitive advantage and resilience, and not just think of this as an additional step that you have to do to comply with regulation, because you will have to do that eventually. But like you rightly said about Bluestone, you know, there is competitive advantage in being ahead of the curve. And, you know, you don't have to say that you know everything. And I think actually what we see from consumers a lot is that when businesses say, you know, we're on a journey and this is what we're trying to do, we don't know everything. It's actually, I think, from a personal level, that's a really good thing, because people don't know everything. I think people are trying to find their feet in terms of what this reporting means and stuff. But as long as you're showing you're on the journey and you're open about that, what you do know and what you don't know, you really get away from that problem of greenwashing.
Yeah, I think that's a key point about sort of being on a journey, having a plan in place and working towards something, and not pretending that you've got all the answers. And I love what you said there about the opportunities for collaboration within our region, that there are businesses that can use somebody else's waste products and add value to that in innovative ways. And obviously the university is a key partner for any businesses looking at opportunities to innovate, and we're good friends with the CAKE programme, the Circular Economy Innovation Communities programme, which again is a sort of cluster model, a peer-to-peer opportunity for businesses to undertake some training in innovation and circular economy development, and find those kinds of linkages like you've pointed out there, of where they can collaborate across different industries within our region. And what a fantastic opportunity that would be economically, and in terms of building up the capacity here in South West Wales. So urging anyone listening to this who potentially needs that kind of support on innovation and research into different approaches, to reach out to colleagues in Swansea University, because the appetite is there for those collaborations with industry. Absolutely. And while I'm talking to you, Max, I'd love to just touch on this thing about kind of career pathways into the environmental sector, and I'll pick this up with colleagues shortly in terms of what your individual backgrounds are, and have you had exciting careers in this space, and what you would say to other people considering a career in environmental consultancy. But from your perspective, Max, as an educator, presumably students across Swansea University are well aware of the need to go into industry with the right knowledge around sustainability and what they need to be bringing into companies. Are you finding that students are really motivated to learn all this stuff, and are you equipping them with the skills that our economy is going to need over the next few years?
Yeah, well, I think it's the same as anything, isn't it? You get some students that are very interested in it, and you get some students who sort of realise that it is of increasing importance and something that they need to know. So it is a spectrum in terms of what they do. But as a university, we work with industry to see what the skills they need are, and then feed that back into the curriculum, so to make sure that we're developing graduates that have the skills that are needed. And it is an interesting one that, so it was the circular economy hotspots at the beginning of this week, and we ran a couple of breakout sessions in that around the impact of academia on achieving circular economies, and skills and learning was one of the things that was discussed there. And there is a real lack of sort of environmental assessment in broad terms. And this was also picked up by a recent sort of large-scale study by LinkedIn, showing that the value of those skills is increasing steadily throughout the world, and people are looking for it. So it is a very important thing to learn, not necessarily to be an in-depth life cycle assessment practitioner, but knowing where you can find the sort of data to back up the suggestions that you might be making as a junior person in the company, to put that business case forward in both environmental, economic, and social terms, I think is a skill that is going to be really important. And on a personal level, that's what we try to teach across the engineering master's programs. So looking at where you can find data, do life cycle assessment, but also collaborate with different degree streams. So we do group projects where they look at increasing the circularity of a cargo e-bike. So they'll do the life cycle assessment, they'll do design changes, but they'll also look at how that they can decrease the environmental impact of that through different business models. So how they complement it so that the design of the product fits up with the business model strategy. And I think, trying to get people to see that sort of interdisciplinary space is very important. And I think that's what the university is increasingly trying to do, and what is increasingly important within industry is to have that appreciation of a systems level approach. And how you can collaborate with different industries and different professions to try and solve the problems that you're facing.
Yeah, really interesting, and hopefully lots of potential career opportunities for graduates coming out, and businesses are looking for, as you say, that kind of holistic whole systems approach, that sort of understanding about the intersectionality of all these issues, but also those skills in environmental assessment and management are in high demand, and increasingly so. Thanks, Max. Enock, I know you've worked for some really interesting companies. When we met, you talked about various jobs you've had. So tell us a little bit about your path to where you are now. I think you've worked in sort of large corporate settings, and now very much out there advising businesses on a one-to-one basis. Talk us through the sort of different ways in which you've used your own skills and qualifications.
Yeah, so briefly, I came into the sustainability when I realized companies' greenhouse gas emissions for carbon gas. And then I was fortunate, what brought me to Swansea, solar company, Solar Polar, where they want to bring in solar-powered heating and cooling to be able to compete with the heat pump industry. So decarbonizing heating in the UK or decarbonizing cooling around the world. And then that led me to see how, or what inspires me about the sustainability has been around thinking differently. So for example, energy efficiency has always been around for the last 15 to 20 years, but because of net zero and decarbonization, society, businesses have to think about energy efficiency through a decarbonization lens. And that's where it ties back into requiring new thinking, because if you look at the last 30 years or so, there's always been new players who have had to come in to try and see things from different angles. So I've been fortunate to work with this variety of organizations, and I enjoy the sustainability because if you compare from 2015, for the Paris Agreement in 2015 to the UN SDGs in 2015, I believe in the last 9 years, the shape of sustainability has changed significantly, and it's going to change. So it will need more, for example, economists who look at sustainability from a business case point of view or a circular economy point of view, or you look at it from an environmental assessment, which is not all by the law, but also how we can have social and other labor practices and modern slavery. So that's sort of what led me to, and what sort of inspires me, and hopefully that would inspire the next generation of students or new graduates. And I've taught about 100 professionals and board within the IEMA courses as well. So I have an insight in terms of training, the huge demand in terms of how much skills are needed to be able to keep up with the amount of knowledge and skills needed as well.
So I suppose the IEMA certification, that's sort of environmental management and assessment, is a qualification that professionals in all sorts of different roles and different parts of the business can undertake that.
Absolutely. So the IEMA, they have the certificate, which is like level 4, level 5, which professionals within businesses, it is a generic where they will teach on environmental management, the law, the assessment tools, but you also have the sustainability. So for example, the global mega trends like the globalization, and other key parts. But you also have the foundation, which tends to be like the operators or the practitioners, where they can start off from that. And then I even also have other courses for the board and executives as well. So yeah, it is for professionals at different stages, whether it's those who run the day-to-day activities or the managers, and then you have the board as well. So everyone can benefit from that.
Yeah, so a good organisation to look at if you in your career are thinking that you could do with upskilling in some of these areas we've been talking about today. Whatever your job within an organisation, it's increasingly important to have an understanding of what we're discussing here. And Leon, you mentioned that Auditel employs, I think you said 140 people. Are you seeing the growth in demand for these kinds of skills and these kind of experts?
Yeah, definitely. Auditel is slightly different, whereas it's a network of consultants, so say 140, and they operate as individual consultancies who would then employ people. So although it's together as a network, it doesn't employ the people directly. It's more of a franchise network. But yeah, a number of consultants within the network are employing bigger and bigger teams all of the time, and they've got individual offices. One of our biggest offices is based in Cardiff, and it does a lot of the carbon accounting for the whole of the UK. Especially some of the larger businesses. So it's definitely a market which is in huge demand, and it's just getting the people that have got the qualifications into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope young people and career changers who are listening to this are getting inspired about potential opportunities in this sector, because it definitely seems to me that we need to build this understanding and skills base across South West Wales so that small businesses have access to the advice and expertise that they really need. The other thing I'm really interested to ask about is whether you think you're seeing businesses increasingly recognise the need for this.
If I could come in there, we primarily, I'll put some case studies in the chat from businesses that we're working with. But I mean, we work with any industry, any size business, and actually we see most of the uptake and most of the real passion around sustainability coming from the SMEs. And would say that actually this is a really important thing, that quite often when we speak about sustainability, it's this top-down approach of policy, ISO standards, big procurement networks. But actually, a lot of the disruptive innovation that we're seeing is coming from these small companies that have the flexibility to enact innovation that larger organizations just wouldn't be able to do. And I think that was one of the key takeaways from the circular economy hotspot, was that, you know, great to get everyone in the room and a really great event, but it does tend to drift towards this high level positioning of where we need to be. But actually, I think, you know, I could go through lots of examples that we have, but I'll just, rather than talking for too long, I'll just put a link to some case studies in the chat that you can look at. But yeah, really interesting. And I think I think SMEs really, for me, especially with the economic sort of distribution of Wales being primarily micro businesses, is where a lot of the support should be focused in terms of building that base level foundation of sustainability, behavioral change, really, which is what is going to be the key to moving towards some of those net zero goals.
Yeah, thank you. That's inspiring words, perhaps to wrap up today's conversation. That kind of call to action for smaller businesses and SMEs, and the great examples that are already leading the way. I mean, as we lead up to the Green Economy conference and exhibition, we're really encouraging those businesses who are leading the way in their sustainability efforts to reach out to us, to be part of the exhibition and the conference on the day, to shout about what you're doing as a small business, because it's those, as has already been mentioned by a couple of our speakers today, it's those inspiring examples and case studies and learning from others who are on the journey that can really make the change happen. And there is energy, isn't there, coming up from small businesses and entrepreneurs who are looking at ways to start up and grow truly sustainable businesses, and they require our support and championing, because that is the direction of travel for all of us. I hope today's conversation has been useful actually for anybody listening, but particularly for businesses that are thinking that they really need to start taking their first steps. So whether you're a food and drink business and you need to reach out to the Welsh Government Food and Drink Sustainability Cluster, and no doubt for other sectors, the built environment sector has already been mentioned. It's reaching out to those networks and peer-to-peer clusters of businesses, so we can all be learning from each other and sharing our knowledge across those systems. Or perhaps if you just want to pick the brains of an independent sustainability consultant like Enock or Alex from Circular Resource Specialists or Leon from Auditel, have an initial conversation and find out what you could be thinking of and the kinds of things that they might be able to support with. Or if you're thinking that this is a career opportunity for you or a development opportunity for members of your team, we've heard today about quite a lot of training opportunities and certifications and industry bodies who can support with that, not least Swansea University, which is clearly a key partner in all of this here in South West Wales, and lots of exciting projects and initiatives happening within the university to connect with industry, to offer support for businesses, and to offer all sorts of training and education courses, whatever level you want to get into this with. There are exciting announcements actually coming from Swansea University that will be revealed at the Green Economy Conference on the 19th of November. We're really delighted to have a number of parts of the university involved in that event, and some exciting projects to talk about there. And we'll also be talking a lot about the circular economy at the Green Economy Conference, and we're delighted to have Dr. Andy Rees, who is Head of Waste Strategy at Welsh Government, chairing a circular economy panel discussion. But of course, we're covering renewable energy as well and sustainable food. And we've got a whole zone devoted to sustainable construction as part of that event on the 19th of November in Swansea Arena. So I cannot underline it strongly enough. You need to be there. If you're a business in our region, an organisation in this space, or if you're just somebody who cares passionately about our climate and our planet and our nature, and wants to see the development of a strong and prosperous green economy here in South West Wales, that is where you need to be. I'd like to just say a big thank you to our 5 panellists as part of this conversation today. Max Green, Enock, Alex, Leon and Mark, thank you so much for sharing your insight and perspectives with us today. It's been a really useful discussion, and thank you all very much for your time.